When we look at mega churches, we try to follow the money and follow the power. And by follow the power, we're talking about decision making. Who makes the key decisions? When you
Okay.
review the Articles of Incorporation for James River Church, it says, Article 6, this corporation will not have members. A lot of people, that would throw them off. What does this mean, the church will not have members? It means that the people that attend are not voting members of the organization. All voting decisions is reserved for the board of directors of the church. We see this practice used a lot by televangelists and mega churches, and it's heavily abused.
Such as Joel Osteen. So James River Church is run by a board. All those 19,000 folks don't have any say.
Hello, and welcome to the Bad Fruit Podcast. Today's episode is a really interesting one. Today I'm joined by Pete Evans, the president of the Trinity Foundation, and Barry Bowen, an investigator for the Trinity Foundation. This organization was founded in 1972. Their mission statement says, to promote the public interest, investigate and expose religious fraud and excess, and to call for transparency, accountability, and stewardship of donor funds at home and abroad. We talk about some of the crazy stories they've investigated over the years. They found pastors connected to the mafia, gangs, drugs, possibly money laundering. They've looked into the insane prices of some of the homes of these mega church pastors. But ultimately, what both Pete and Barry are really wanting is more transparency, so that the donors, the tithers of these mega churches that are giving money to these pastors will know exactly where that money is going, so that they can't just use it for extravagant homes and cars and vacations, and then turn around and ask you for more money. They don't hate the church, and I think that's really important. Just like this podcast, while we do expose bad fruit in the church, we don't hate the church. We love the church. We love the Word of God. I believe that the Trinity Foundation also is trying to seek unity and transparency in the church by exposing those who are taking advantage of the congregation of these megachurches. They want to expose to the public how these televangelists and megachurch pastors are abusing the funds and at times even doing illegal things. In this episode, we do talk a little bit about James River. They were able to look into the church before we talked, and they share what they found, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope that you hear what Pete and Barry have to say about this topic, and enjoy. How are you guys doing today?
We're okay. We're doing well. I've got a cold, but other than that, I tested negative for COVID, so that's a plus.
Oh, well, that's good. All right. Well, my name's Jonathan, so thanks for doing this. I know you've told me your names, but
I'll start. I'm Pete Evans, president of Trinity Foundation, and our main occupation is investigating religious fraud and excess. And
I'm Barry Bowen. I'm our staff investigator.
All right.
I oversee the Pastor Plains Project and some other projects we do.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for doing this. I've looked into your organization. I think you guys are doing a great job, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
And so hopefully we can, talk about that a little bit today. And
I can talk a little bit about our history.
Sure, that'd be great.
Trinity Foundation started in 1972 with Ole Anthony. He had a religious conversion experience and ended up creating Trinity Foundation with the board of directors and starting for after I guess maybe 3 or 4 years, his secretary kept telling him that he couldn't have a mission without a Bible study. So he began to teach a Bible study after about 3 or 4 years. His conversion experience was listening to a guy named Norman Grubb from England, and Norman Grubb told him that God can't use you unless you're a failure. And that rang true with him. It sounds ridiculous, but if you look at Jesus' first words, he said, "I came to speak to the poor, the downtrodden, the blind, the people in prison, and people that really have failed lives." And so that rang true with him. And so he, after a failed concert to try to, it was a Christian music concert with Andre Crouch and the Disciples and Pat Boone back in the early 70s. Trinity kind of went underground for a while. But when I was in college in 1978, I met Ole in 1974 and was one of the first members of his Bible study. But in 1978, we began to investigate religious broadcasting. I did it as a senior project in college with a company called Arbitron. They were kind of the Nielsen ratings back in the 70s, and we looked at the fact that radio and TV preachers were basically just had this small niche audience that people that followed them, like old women mostly, or not entirely, that they would listen to these pastors and televangelists that were just asking for money all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the main, or screaming at people about their sin.
Sure,
And
yeah.
those guys, they had probably one or two people listening at the time on the radio or whatever, or nobody. But so that was my first experience of religious broadcasting, and we kind of let it drop for a long time. And then in the late '80s, Ole spoke to the Congressional Subcommittee on what was the name of it?
1987, there was a congressional hearing following the Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart scandals.
Yeah, and so Ole and John Rutledge here submitted a proposal to regulate religious broadcasting somehow, and describing all the problems with all the back then, the jets, the personal jets, the mansions, and the misuse of donor money, that was coming out in the news at the time with Jim Baker. And soon with Jimmy Swaggart and some others. So we got on we were in the Congressional Register after that, and Diane Sawyer and Primetime Live, which was a huge program in the '90s. Have you heard of Diane Sawyer?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
I'm young, but I have heard of it.
Okay, yeah. So her producer called us, talked to Ole. They started investigating. I was working for Trinity Foundation, but wasn't part of the investigations yet. And so he went in undercover with a hidden camera to this company that helped promote televangelists, and also he started doing dumpster diving. I think our video is still on YouTube about that, about all the first things we did along those lines. And then I went in and undercover in a large printing factory. Barry's looking at his watch. I'll try to wrap it up. In '93 with a hidden camera for an early version of Fox News before they were political. And I got video of all these different televangelists using the same printing plates. So you get one letter from one televangelist that had the same dream about you that this other televangelist, and of course, and the dream included that you had to send them money,
Obviously, yes.
and fill out your prayer request and send your prayer request in with name of your address and oftentimes your credit card information. So then after a few more stints undercover in a cult in '94 and in some ministries in '96 and '97. Yeah, I worked undercover in Benny Hinn Ministries at one point, and Jimmy Swaggart Ministries at one point. So I got my PI license before I started working undercover, and so we've been doing this for a long time. And 11 million people watched that Diane Sawyer show, and it was their biggest audience to date at that point. And
Wow.
so that kind of put us on the map.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
let's talk about James River Church for you, if you like, unless you have more questions about me, to me about our our history and what we've done.
Sh- Sure. No, I mean we can get right into that. I was just gonna kind of ask, since you have been around for a few years now, maybe just some of the more interesting or if there's any stories of things that you found that were just really shocking to you, just kind of maybe some generalizations
Oh,
of just those bigger
God,
stories that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that a church did that. If there's anything that just really pops out over the last 40 so years
the prayer
of doing
requests
this.
are one thing that get thrown in the trash without getting read.
Oh
Um,
wow.
we've got that. Robert Tilton wasn't the only one. That was a big one. We've also found that there are a lot of scandals. Found people that once they give themselves permission to the point of excess with living a lavish lifestyle with jets and mansions. Oftentimes it includes sexual sin as well. And so,
Yeah.
like the recent things that happened with Robert Morris, and we found the name of a person that was paid over $400,000 to keep quiet, who had
Oh
a
wow.
sexual affair with Paul Crouch Sr. Of course, he's passed away, but and people are kind of sexual. It's kind of coming back to the church. Church is realizing that, hey, these sexual predators, that's not good, and
Yeah.
and so we found a lot of that, and we've I started tracking jets in the early 2000s with the FAA Freedom of Information Act requests in later on, like around 2007 or so. But before that, I had a pilot that was able to get Excel worksheets of arrivals and destinations of different televangelist jets. So we've been doing that for a while. Then Barry took it over and does it better than I ever did.
One of the things that stands out for me is the ties of religion to organized crime. There was this Catholic priest whose brother was one of the heads of one of the five mob families in New York City. Uh,
Wow.
there is one of the pioneer televangelists, Rex Humbard. He got a loan, a mafia connected loan. And we've found those type of connections.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
even you want to tell them about Tilton and the what we
Oh,
found?
Tilton's one of the craziest. Robert Tilton was questioned in court after the TV expose aired. He filed libel suits. Former church donors, members countersued him. He countersued Trinity Foundation and ABC a bunch of times. It was just crazy. But he was questioned about his relations with Herman Beebe. Herman was a crazy criminal. He was
Hmm.
involved in a bunch of big scandals, the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s. He was also involved in the Iran Contra scandal, and he had
What?
ties to Carlos Marcello, head of the New Orleans Mafia, and he
Oh my
provided a
gosh.
loan to Robert Tilton.
And also one
That's
a
wild.
had a DEA informant turned a government witness. He lived with us for a while here at Trinity Foundation while he was under in a probationary period. But he told us that when he flew into one of the cities in Mexico, one of the southern Mexico, and one of the airport managers showed him a big pallet of, and at the very top were these pamphlets that were Robert Tilton's pamphlets to hand out to people. But right
Hmm.
under the pamphlets was cash, U.S. cash. The whole pallet was cash,
Oh wow.
and that was an interesting find as well.
So was that like drug money laundering or?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the obvious question. We don't all we
Yeah.
know about the pilot, and there's probably more about it in our files that I've never even.
That's the most
Yeah.
obvious, educated guess.
Right.
Yeah.
He had ties to the head of the Crips, was an infamous drug laundering gang. Um,
Yeah.
as
So
well.
so we have mega church pastors with mafia and drug lord ties, and that's crazy.
Oh yeah, and more recently, I won't name large church organization names for fear of us getting firebombed, but
Sure.
there's an organization that has a church in the Philippines, a worldwide, but it's all over. They've got hundreds of churches here in the U.S. and Canada,
Yeah.
and we've got information about them. Uh, about bulk cash smuggling going on with their organization.
Oh
And
my
that,
gosh.
that means what they're doing is uh, they, their different churches funnel money up the chain through their district pastors, and then the informant says they meet in a certain location in Las Vegas, and a large jet comes, and all the cash is loaded on the jet and carted out of the U.S.
Wow.
Another pastor named Apollo Quibeloy, who's now on the FBI's most wanted list for bulk cash smuggling, for sex trafficking. You can look him up.
Yeah.
If you just Google Apollo Quibeloy FBI, you'll find him.
Yeah.
And
That's crazy.
he was there was a standoff just about a week ago. Did you read about
Yeah.
that? The police were after him in the Philippines,
Hmm.
but back about 4 years ago, his jet was detained in Honolulu. They found hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash in a suitcase on the plane that was wrapped up in socks in a suitcase, and but the his Apollo Quibeloy's assistant took the fall for him. She said, "Well, that's my money. It wasn't."
Sure, it's yours.
And
Yeah.
so but she was probably rewarded very very handsomely for doing that. And she went through a probationary period and then went back to the Philippines.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of subterfuge with
Yeah.
the laws are very lax. And the IRS is loath to go after churches. They just don't they
Sure.
don't do it. Their
Well,
lawyers, yeah,
yeah.
their
Well,
lawyers
and
say, hey, unless we can win outright, you show us something that we can win outright in court, then we'll go after them. And
yeah.
that's not easy to start an investigation. Anyway, go ahead. You
No,
had a
no,
question.
no. I was just gonna say that I think sometimes too, whenever anybody brings a case against a church, the general like public perception of that type of case is always viewed negatively, as though you're just going after a church. You're just you hate
Right.
Christians or something,
Oh yeah.
which I don't think is your intention with your organization to hate on churches. It's these are not good
Right. No,
pastors. These are not good organizations. There's good
we're not,
churches and there's bad churches.
we're not out to hurt the church, but we are out to reveal the misuse of donor money
Exactly. Yeah.
in excess. And so in 2005 to 2008, this is a whole new another story about us, but um, earlier than that, 2004 to 2008, we were doing trash runs at a particular law firm here in Dallas and getting tons of information. Televangelists' N numbers on their tail numbers on their jets, their mansions, their court cases. One of them I already told you about was the fellow that wanted to go public about his affair with Paul Kraft Sr. But
Yeah.
so we started compiling reports. We sent 24 reports that ended up going to the U.S. Senate in August of 2007 to Senator Grassley and Senator Baucus of the Senate Finance Committee. So they wanted to investigate, and unfortunately, it was right about the time the U.S. economy crashed, and they were tasked with saving the U.S. economy, and there were other reasons that it didn't happen too, because Senator Grassley wanted to err on the side of mercy and give them a chance to respond. So he asked, and he got no's across the board, and all these televangelists, the Grassley Six, so to speak, the 6 letters he sent out. They circled the wagons. They hired high class lawyers. They hired, in Benny Hinn's case, he hired 2 ex-IRS commissioners to help him out, including the IRS commissioner that had legitimized Scientology. So as a church. So and then we sent other additional reports in 2010, but it ended up they did report and to the public that, and those were really not, they didn't really go anywhere, their reports, and most of their reports were constructed by an IRS special agent that drew most of her information from our reports. But what they found was a lot of the informants clammed up because they were afraid of getting sued because they'd signed NDAs. You know what an NDA is, non-disclosure agreement. And so I hate those things. And anyway, go ahead.
I would like to add that one of the things that we discovered during the Grassley inquiry was that a number of televangelists were running businesses from their churches. So we would do corporation searches, and for example, Paula White had a company called Paula White Enterprises, and the address was Without Walls International Church. When you do something like that, it raises all kinds of questions. Is the company paying rent for the use of the facility? Rental income sometimes can be taxed. And churches and ministries, they can be required to file what's called a Form 990T. That's for unrelated business income. But none of those organizations that Grassley was looking into were filing a 990T.
Yeah.
And so they were running corporations out of their church, essentially rent-free, possibly.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so we don't. In the case of James River Church, we don't know if that's happening, but we can go there now if you want.
Sure.
Talk about
so
that?
yeah, that'd be great. So this podcast, we've been focusing on the modern American megachurch, and we've been using our local megachurch, James River, kind of as a case study for a lot of these things. James River they claim to have around 19,000 members, which, according to a list I found online, that puts them around the 25th largest megachurch in the United States.
Wow.
As far as attendance.
Yeah.
So they have 3. They have 3 campuses in this area. Then they have one in another town that's kind of like a satellite campus, and then they also have an online campus. So they have about 5 campuses if you count the online one. Which the online one, I don't know how they calculate those numbers, because I've watched their stuff and I'm not a member, you know what I mean? So are there people who are watching out of curiosity or as watchdogs, that get counted in that 19,000? But either way, they have a lot of people that are attending their churches. They host one of the largest men's conferences in the country here in town, called the Stronger Men's Conference. They actually were in the news earlier this year because of it, because Mark Driscoll was at the conference. They had a male sword swallower who climbed a pole. There's a lot of controversy around that because of the performer's checkered past, and then Mark Driscoll. There's a big conflict there. So, anyways, it was a big deal. It drew a lot of national attention. And John Lindell is the pastor of this church, and he's had a lot of the other mega churches kind of in that sort of NAR, New Apostolic Reformation, which they have a lot of ties to a lot of the names you've mentioned already today. So, Bill Johnson and Chris Hodges, a lot of those guys are maybe not as extreme as Benny Hinn, but they're all kind of friendly with each other in a lot of ways, and they're all pretty big megachurch pastors. And so
Right.
I don't know.
Oftentimes they will speak at each other's churches for a large honorarium, and those honorariums are often considered as gifts and non-taxable. So you might speak at somebody's church. You got an extra $5,000 or $10,000.
Yeah.
for the more famous ones, and that's non-taxable income. And we've seen one pastor indicted. His name was Morris Cirillo for all this, for tax evasion. And then the judge said, "Well, did you check to see if this was a gift to him? Were these gifts to him?" And he threw out the case. What we thought was a good case, and he skated. And his son now runs one of the most profitable TV networks in the country. That used to be a religious, and still is a religious nonprofit TV network called INSP, the Inspirational Network. They recreated themselves over a decade ago as the Western TV network, and they started doing these reality TV shows like Western Man Goes Against Western Mountain Man, and so things things that guys are interested. Guys like the old TV cowboy westerns, and especially people my age. Not me particularly. I don't. But I
Right,
watched enough of them when I was a
like
kid.
the
If I looked at
stereotypical stuff.
yeah. Rifleman, Virginian, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, all those kind of things. And so they're in the top, often in the top 5, and sometimes they've been in the top 3 television networks, cable networks, up there with CNN and Fox News and ABC, CBS. And how they stay a religious TV network in the night, in the middle of the night, like 4 in the morning, they'll run a couple hours of a televangelist camp meeting.
Oh wow!
And yeah,
And then they get to be tax-free
I didn't
still.
take away from that. I want to let Barry talk about James River Church.
So
Sure.
when we look at mega churches, we try to follow the money and follow the power. And by follow the power, we're talking about decision making. Who makes the key decisions? When you review the Articles of Incorporation for James River Church, it says, Article 6, this corporation will not have members. A lot of people, that would throw them off. What does this mean, the church will not have members? It means that the people that attend are not voting members of the organization. All voting decisions is reserved for the board of directors of the church. We see this practice used a lot by televangelists and mega churches, and it's heavily abused.
Such as Joel Osteen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So James River Church is run by a board. All those 19,000 folks don't have any say.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly the year, but they actually had their congregation vote to get rid of elders and install a board of directors. And some former employee who was actually fired and asked to sign an NDA, but thankfully he didn't. He was actually offered hush money too, to just kind of, disappear. But he told me that they basically, this board of directors is appointed by John Lindell. They are mostly his friends, family, things like that. All the other pastors are his children, actually. He can actually fire these board members. There's no accountability, essentially, to fire them if he wants to. So if anybody were to step in and say, I don't really like what you're doing, with the men's conference this year, I think maybe we shouldn't have had that performer, he can just fire them and hire new people that will be yes men, is my understanding based on the information I've been given. And I've heard that that's kind of a common thing that some of these churches do, because then essentially they don't have to worry about, accountability from elders who are going to hold them to the Bible or any of those, pesky religious things.
Pesky, that pesky Bible, what's this about laying down your life? Forget that. Let's try to build everybody up.
Right, yeah.
And tell
Exactly.
them, peace when there is no peace,
In trying to follow the money, it's very difficult with James River Church. They do not follow 990 because they're not required to do so. For people that have never looked at a Form 990, nonprofits that are not churches, mosques, synagogues, they're required to file these documents. It discloses total revenue, total expenses, compensation for highly paid individuals and board members. There's this statement of expenses page, which would reveal legal expenses. So, I mean, you say you've got a mega church being sued for sexual abuse. That would be disclosed if churches actually had to file that, a Form 990. Years ago, James River did they would publish an annual report on their website. And the last I found for them doing that was in 2017. And that year, they reported total assets of $62 million, total income of $28 million, total expenses of $26 million. So a lot of people don't realize how much money megachurches generate.
Yeah.
That year, their women's conference had over 10,000 attendees. Their Stronger Men's Conference had over 7,000. So I looked, and before we were talked, and
Sure.
I saw the price for the men's conference tickets from last year. They were $119 to $179. They easily brought in over $800,000 if they had the same amount of tickets sold this year.
Well, and in 27, that was back in 2017.
Oh, it was probably more now, to be honest with
Probably.
you, attendance-wise.
I'm saying they're one of the largest men's conferences in the country now, and so in the past 7 years they've probably grown quite a bit. So it's probably well over. It could be even in the millions just on the income from the ticket sales to the men's conference, and not to mention the women's.
When we try following the money, another thing that we do is we look for Paycheck Protection Program loans. So in 2020, when COVID was really taking off, Congress, the president, authorized these forgivable loans to allow small businesses and small nonprofits retain their employees, because many haven't had to shut down. James River Church did get a Paycheck Protection Program loan for $2,135,000. That loan was forgiven, so the taxpayers paid for it. And it was for them to retain 250 jobs. So that gives you a sense of how big the organization is. That's full-time, not part-time.
Were you aware they had that many employees?
Not that many full-time. I knew that they had I know they do a lot of volunteer people who work for them, in different capacities. I knew that they had a lot of secretaries and different staff and, facilities and things like that. But I wasn't aware they had that many employees, though.
If they stretched the truth about their numbers of employees, that would have been a fraudulent way to get the PPP money. But
Sure.
we don't have any way of knowing, and probably you don't either.
You can still
No.
include part-time on a Paycheck Protection Program loan.
Okay.
Just verify.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I don't know as far as, how large each particular sector of the church is. I know they have facility teams that take care of that. But one thing that's very common in a lot of these mega churches is that they use basically free volunteer work, at least for the Sundays and their big events. So a lot of I've been told by a few people, like these men's conferences, the people who are actually working them are volunteers who actually had to pay to get a ticket to go and then volunteer. So they were, working the aisles. They're, oh, here's your seat. Here's your beef jerky. It's the men's conference, everything like that. And they actually paid. Maybe it's a discounted ticket. I don't know for sure, but still, they paid to go to that because they were going to get to hear all these world-class speakers, I guess. But they're there serving for not even really for free. They paid to serve, really. So I'm slightly shocked to hear that there's 250 employees, but again, I don't know because again there's 4 campuses. There could be a lot of facility people, and they do have youth programs and things like that, and there may be some paid, at least part-time employees there. So
if the church is a school, it's easy for the number of employees to jump, or a summer program.
Sure. Yeah, they have a gym and a cafe too. So
also, as part of our efforts to follow the money, we look at personal assets. How does the pastor live? Does he live in an expensive home, a mansion? Some pastors' homes are very easy to find. Some, like John Lindell, are not. Uh, Pastors, famous people, people that have had death threats, that they can have their addresses removed from county assessor websites, etc. I
Okay.
mean, there are different things that can be done to hide residential property of a pastor. It could be
Hmm.
registered to a shell company or a trust. And
Okay.
so I would love to put up billboards in some large cities that says, church donors, do you know where your pastor lives?
That'd be funny. So I was able to find at least the due to some records, and I can send them to you later. Um, my co-host, who's not here today, he actually found the neighborhood that he lives in, not the house, but at least the neighborhood. And it is a gated community, golf course, gated community. We couldn't find his house, but we found houses for sale in that neighborhood. The cheapest one was $3 million, and there's some houses up to like over 500, or not 500, $5 million. So 3 million to $5 million. So these are very nice homes. Again, gated community,
If you
golf
give
course,
us the
and
neighborhood, we
the
could probably find it. Barry is very diligent about that.
yeah.
I mean,
And just for the record, in this area where we live, that's a we don't live in, this isn't California where a tiny little house costs you $1 million. This is an area where most houses are maybe 200 to 400,000 for a good nice single family home, right?
yeah.
And you can find houses even in a little bit less than that, and maybe a little more, that are still just kind of your normal. So once you get up to that 1 million and above, in this area, those are very nice homes. So if it's at 3 million to 5, those are going to be some really, really, really nice homes.
We
Um,
Okay.
created a master address list. It's now over 370 pages long.
oh
And
wow.
by looking for properties of religious leaders, we've made a lot of interesting discoveries. We found over 40 beach houses, beach condos, and waterfront homes of pastors and religious leaders. The most expensive beach condo is about $15 million, and that's north of
Wow.
Miami. Um,
And that's like a vacation home, right? That's not their main residence. That would be like an
correct,
extra home. Okay, okay.
correct.
Yeah.
Um, so we find clusters. Sometimes you'll find a bunch of preachers living close to each other, and you never realize that there were close regional ties. Um,
wow.
there are pastors that will travel across the country. They'll plant multiple churches. Jenison Franklin has a church in Georgia and another one in California. Has to fly back and forth. There are a number of pastors that have done that over the years, and there's one that we currently track. His name is Keith Moore. Keith Moore's ministry, Faith Life International, currently owns 3 jets,
Wow.
a Raytheon 390, a Falcon 900, and a Falcon 7X. And so he flies back and forth between Sarasota, Florida, and Branson, Missouri.
Oh wow. Hey, that's
And
right in our neighborhood.
yeah, so he's got a really expensive home in parsonage. It's church owned. They spent millions of dollars on it. He's got his own beach house in Florida that he personally owns. And then they've got property in Missouri as well. So,
What about Ron Carpenter? Does he have? He's got two churches too. One on the West Coast, one on the East Coast.
yeah, he has an expensive parsonage in California. It's, I think, about $6 million. He also has a $1 million like home in Greenville, South Carolina area.
Now, that's a good segue to a question I had for you. I know that, and back in the day, this was a probably a good thing. A lot of churches would pay for the pastor to have a parsonage. It was their house, right? It was a small church, and they didn't pay him very much, so they're like, here's a small little house for you. We'll even maybe give you a stipend for your car so you can get to and from church and help the community out. But with
Exactly.
the mega church,
Yeah, yeah. You're right on the nails with that. If for instance, that $6 million parsonage. Well, they had a $7 or $8 million parsonage they just sold. The $6 million house of Ron Carpenter is not a parsonage, but they had two parsonages at one
okay,
point. one in California and one in like the $7 million one and a $1 million one in South Carolina. So we created, or Barry created, a list yesterday of suggestions for to try to clean up the loopholes in our laws, to limit the price of parsonages, to limit the amount of housing allowances, which are non-taxable. Barry can talk about that.
We have found pastors getting paid over $200,000 for a housing allowance, and it's tax exempt. There's one person that I'm currently working on a report on that at least 1 year took all the compensation as non-taxable benefits.
Yeah.
Perfect compensation if you can get it. There's all these abuses. So, for example, Kenneth Copeland, his mega church is Eagle Mountain International Church. It has a trade name, Kenneth Copeland Ministries. They own a very large lake house right off of Eagle Mountain Lake. And Texas law restricts a parsonage to 1 acre. So they have closely drawn their boundary 1 acre around this, but there's actually more land there. So, I mean, there's all kinds of gimmicks
it's insane.
They
drew a line. They allowed Copeland to draw a line around the house. Just right around the house. The house is almost an acre in size. It's 19,000
Right.
square foot house, and and yet it sits on hundreds of acres surrounded that are just cattle land, just where the cattle used to graze.
Yeah. So these parsonages, I mean, essentially, we if we track the money, obviously it's coming from the church. So these are coming from tithes, from donations, from donors, people who are thinking they're giving to they think they're giving to God's work, right, to the spread of the gospel, but then
or to help the poor. Yeah.
Or to help the poor, and then they end up spending. Those churches are actually giving that money then to the pastor, so that he can have $250,000 a year for a parsonage. I mean, is that an accurate description of kind of how those tithe monies are being funneled out?
That's very accurate.
So there's housing allowances. That's for when the pastor owns the home.
Okay.
And then the parsonage is when the church owns the property.
Right.
And there are preachers. We work with other media organizations, documentary filmmakers. So we're not at liberty yet to reveal some of the ones that we've
Oh yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Will be
Yeah.
disclosed in the future. But there's like one preacher particular that he gets very large housing allowance annually and is able to use that to own multiple homes in different states.
So when the church owns it, then he's essentially living there completely free. But they're having these. They still have these really fancy mansions and things like that, but he doesn't have to pay any taxes whatsoever on that property because the church owns it, and because they're a 501c3, they don't have to pay any taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct. For parsonage, but for the personally owned houses, they do have to pay property taxes.
When you look at the tax bills, we did write an article about this. People can find it on our website. We did a big article about some of the biggest parsonages and how much they would pay in property taxes if they weren't exempt. And in some cases, there are some small amount of taxes, but it's sort of like a tax for maybe trash pickup or some other things that is part of that. So I wouldn't necessarily say all taxes are removed, but in some cases they will save over $50,000 in taxes, property taxes annually.
We were about 3 years ago now. We worked with Houston Chronicle on a story that they did about parsonages in Texas, and they found dozens. I can't remember how many exactly. Parsonages worth over $1 million.
I think over 20.
Wow.
And unfortunately, with the Houston Chronicle, you have to subscribe to read their article. But we wrote another article off to the side about that article, and that is available on our website for free.
Okay. Yeah, we'll link to your website on our Facebook page, and I'll include it in our show notes so people can find your
Great.
ministry.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
With the way that churches report things, you had mentioned earlier that it's kind of hard to follow that money sometimes. Would a church have to list that a pastor was getting a parsonage? Like, would they have to list that anywhere? So, I mean, again, this would be speculation, but let's say John Lindell lived in a parsonage that the church owned, and it was a $3 million home. Would the church have to say that they were paying for a $3 million home?
If churches were required to file a Form 990, under Schedule J, there is a thing for housing provided, or a housing allowance provided by the organization. So if they did have to file a 990, that's where it would be reported.
And in a sense, that's our dream goal, if you will, is to have mega churches and large ministries file the Form 990. But in the current climate, a lot of the really political connected pastors would claim religious persecution, and unfortunately it would be hard to get. But that's one of the things we'd like to see. I would not like to see it for anything less than a mega church. I would not like to see it. I have to file a 990 myself. It's not easy. It's a pain in the ass, and I just it takes me 3 or 4 days to do it. That's because I know what I'm doing. In the early days, it took me a couple of weeks. So for anything, but a large church could hire a CPA to do it for $5,000.
Yeah.
And they have the money to do it,
Absolutely.
And it would give the public an idea of where the money went. That's what we're trying to push for.
We mentioned earlier the 1987 congressional hearing that Congress had about abuses in large mega churches or ministries. During that hearing, preacher D. James Kennedy testified, and he told Congress that donors have a responsibility to check out where the money's going. So this is at the heart of our work. We believe in donor responsibility. So how can donors make truly informed decisions if proper financial information is not available? They can't do it. So at a bare minimum, you need things like disclosing the compensation of the pastor. How otherwise would you know if they're committing excessive compensation, if they're really getting rich off their tax-exempt status?
Yeah, one famous televangelist, Oral Roberts, around the same period of time, was quoted as, why wouldn't churches be willing to tell people where the money goes? Why we file a 990, and they did back then. Then they stopped soon after. But but they said, why wouldn't we let people know where the money's going?
They started reporting them in again.
Oral Roberts did.
On the 990, or Roberts Evangelist Association files.
Awesome.
Cool.
I know that some pastors have said that if they were the CEO of a corporation of the same size as their congregation, then they would expect to make a certain compensation. So, in the example of James River, they have 19,000 members, or according to you, not really members at all, but they have 19,000 people who attend. So then they would say, if I was the CEO of a corporation of 19,000 employees, I would expect to make this income. And that's how some of them base, or at least rationalize their income. And if you look up the pay of CEOs, a lot of them are making over 200,000, 300,000 a year, depending on the industry and all of those different things. And it's not really a genuine statement, really, there, because
300,000. That's low for a CEO. I mean, they're making.
Well, yes. I'm just saying, for some of these pastors, maybe their actual just yearly income before other expenses may only be 300,000, 400,000.
Let me tell you another little story. And back in 2005, we were doing trash runs. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that we found a law firm. We were finding a lot of good information. They started shredding, and one of the guys that was with me just said, "This pisses me off. I'm gonna give me this bag, and I'm gonna because they had a straight line shredder, so it was like all these little ribbons and clumped
Okay.
together, where like one page was all kind of clumped together. So a week later, he showed me a document he taped together, and it was Benny Hinn and his family's salaries, and they were he was making 1.6 million of a salary, plus his
Okay.
wife was making $366,000 at the time. Plus his daughter was making 60,000. Plus his son-in-law was making 90,000. So family members' salaries came to 2.1 million.
Yeah.
And then you add then Benny Hinn was also making $30,000 a year consultant fee for a company he created that sold his products
Yeah.
that sold his products back to his ministry. Now, so his right hand is selling the products to his left hand, or vice
Is that
versa.
legal? I mean, that seems almost like money laundering. I mean, I don't know, but that just seems really, really shady
It's
to
like
me.
that, yeah. Well, the deal is that because the lawyer said, and because their board of directors approved it, that he could get a consultant's fee from that organization, from his
Okay.
organization that sold his products. It doesn't
So
seem legal.
There's a term
because his
for it.
board of elders did it, or not
Yeah,
elders,
his board of directors,
board
yeah.
of directors, yeah.
There's a term for it. It's called self-dealing. That's when the head of a
Okay.
nonprofit does business with a company they also control. It's not illegal unless you excessively profit off the nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
So one of the problems is there is an excise tax on self-dealing, but there's a loophole. It does not apply to churches.
Interesting.
Or I'm sorry, it
So,
does not apply to
Pastor.
public foundations,
oh, okay,
which
okay.
that would include churches.
Pastors are
So,
not required
And
to pay the excise tax.
on excessive compensation either, correct.
Yeah.
so we found out recently that Elevation Church, Stephen Furtick, he had an extravagant home, and he said that he bought that with the profits from his book sales. And he's like, it's not the payments from the church, or the church isn't paying for it. It's because I'm selling these books and because I do these speaking tours. Well, it was then discovered that Elevation Church was buying his books from him. So yes,
Right.
technically maybe the church didn't actually pay for it, but they did pay for it because they bought the books. And whenever these speakers come in, we've had Chris Hodges, Bill Johnson come and speak at James River. Those books are for sale at James River. And John Lindell's written a book. His wife wrote a book. His kids may have. I don't know if they have yet or not, but they're also pastors there at the church. And so they're all for sale there. And I don't know for sure if the church is buying these books and then, reselling them, and if that's how they're getting it, or if he's getting a commission off of them. But perhaps you could speak a little bit to, because it kind of ties into some of the things we're talking about here, those extra things that churches do or pastors do for that income. And you mentioned on a Facebook post recently that I read of yours, you guys posted about Keith Craft and how he does life coaching, and he makes like 84,000 a year doing life coaching. And I feel like that's
80,000 a couple.
oh okay,
Yeah.
right. Oh well, yeah, that's what I meant. Per
Couple
person, yeah.
that he coaches, so to speak. Go ahead and talk about that. Yeah.
So Keith
I know I
Craft,
kind of threw a lot at you there.
Keith
Yeah.
Craft is pastor of Elevate Life Church in Frisco, Texas. He's got 2 houses in Destin, Florida. It's a vacation destination. It's a little over a mile from the beach, so we don't technically classify them as beach houses, but some people might.
Right.
He's got 2 houses in Texas. He's got a mountain home in Colorado. He owns a jet. He owns a yacht. We estimate his property holdings alone to be worth at least $13 million.
Jeez.
So he does life coaching. He's not the only one, but there are others that do it as well. Nicole Crank does life coaching. She's charging over $16,000. Mostly the women are the people that are using her as a life coach. We're looking for the ways that people make money off the church. Back in the 1800s, during the gold rush, there was a saying that if you really want to get rich, you sell picks and shovels. And so there are people selling these services to the church and the church membership, church attendees, and obtaining a lot of wealth from it. One example would be the religious TV networks. They're selling airtime to the churches and ministries, and they're making a lot of money doing it. And some of them are not filing a 990. Daystar Television Network doesn't file a 990. They're the second largest religious network in America. And they could be getting in $50 million a year in airtime. We don't know, not disclosing it. But we've did an article about preachers that are basically selling prophecies. You can contact them and they'll give you a prophecy over the phone, and they charge based on the minutes of the phone call. This is no different to me than the psychics back in the day that would read fortunes over the phone, etc.
Or currently,
yeah,
I mean, current psychics, yeah, it's the same mode of operation.
Well, a lot of those people who do the prophecy type ministries, they've been exposed for years as being complete frauds. It's not a move of the Holy Spirit or anything like that. It's literally like a psychic. They're just kind of guessing, like, oh, you thinking about your dead grandma, she says hi, or something stupid like that, and these prophecies are a lot of times, because I've kind of looked into some of those people, and it's just the most shallow, basic, generic information. You or I could probably figure out how to do the exact same thing, just watching a few of these YouTube videos. And it's really sad that people then believe that they're actually speaking to a man of God and hearing a true prophecy from God, and they're getting fleeced. And then these people live in extravagant lifestyles. So.
Right. Yeah.
We published an article on our website about the speaking business, about honorariums. And in that article, there is a clue to something that we're investigating. We have basically an informant that has revealed to us a ministry was involved in, it looks like, money laundering through honorariums. And we're trying to learn more about this, but in order to really understand the big picture, we need more informants to contact us. And they can do so. They can send us an email. They can call us. Be glad.
And I'll definitely include your contact information, so that if anybody listening to this now in our area, or our listeners, if they have any information about these types of things, then they can pass that on to you guys. Because
I'll give you our generic contact email.
Sure.
Trinity at trinityfi.org.
All right.
And I can say it differently. Trinity at trinityfi.org. The FI stands for Foundation Incorporated.
Perfect. So, and I'll make sure I put on that on our Facebook page and on the show notes and stuff.
Something else I'd like to add for your local audience. We haven't written an article about this yet, but I think it was last week or this week. This week, I discovered 2 jets registered to Steward Financial Holdings, Inc.
Okay.
That's owned by the Assemblies of God, which their headquarters is in Springfield, Missouri. They actually have another jet, I believe it's under AG Financial or Assemblies of God Financial Services Group. So they have at least 3 jets that we know of.
Which is not surprising at all, because so some of this information, people have given me, I can't necessarily totally confirm it. It's some of it's, I guess, speculation. But there is allegedly a local organization, and maybe it's the one that you mentioned just now, but they use their jet to fly in these big speakers. So, if Bill Johnson's coming to speak, he's flying in on these private jets, and, he's not flying coach, right? And so that's one of the perks that if you come and speak at James River is, they're gonna fly you in, and apparently it's like a donation that they give this service to them, and then they do the honorarium speaking fees and things like that, and one thing too, real quick, I was just thinking about something you said. What's really interesting is a lot of these people kind of have a circuit, right? James River every summer has what they call the Sizzling Summer Series. And really what it is John Lindell doesn't preach for a few weeks, and he brings in pastors from other churches. They get the honorariums, and he'll actually go preach at a different church during that time. And one thing that I was thinking, and again, it's maybe speculation, so I'll just preface it with, I can't say for sure about this one, but it's a speculation in my mind, is that if, and I'm just going to use a low number, right? If it costs them $10,000 to have somebody speak for a Sunday, right? Well, James River's tithers are paying that pastor $10,000, but John's at a different church making maybe $10,000. So each church is $10,000, poor because they gave it to a pastor. So it's not necessarily illegal, I would suppose, because each church is just paying that honorarium. But they're friends, and they're speaking at each other's churches, and they're basically making money off of each other's churches. Is almost a way that, in my mind, at least how I think about it, is a way to, you can't just necessarily take 10 grand out of your own church account for no reason, right? You can maybe have to have some reason for it. But if you speak at another church and somebody speaks at yours, and then again with the book sales and all those different things. So
Right.
I don't know if you can speak to anything like that.
Exactly. They're already paying James Lindell a salary.
Yeah.
So they're already paying for a full-time pastor. So this circuit that is a good word for it. The circuit that you talked about, where they go to each other's churches and get honorariums. It just milks the church out of more and more money that they've already paid for a pastor to pastor the church.
Yeah.
And so it's ludicrous in my opinion.
Perfect example would be Ed Young Jr. He, on his website, you can look to see who's preaching each Sunday at Fellowship Church, and he missed a lot. I think last year he preached about 30 Sundays. I don't remember the exact number, but you can tell he's missed a lot
over
the entire year.
Over a third of over the Sundays. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No, I wanted to thank you both for coming on today and giving me some of your time. I definitely want to be respectful of that. Thank you for everything that you've shared, and I definitely will make sure that people can find you guys and get in touch with you guys if they have anything.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you for the platform for interviewing us.
Absolutely. And I hope that you both have a wonderful day, and hopefully maybe we can talk again sometime. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode as we heard from Pete and Barry from the Trinity Foundation. I found their stories of excess and financial abuse very interesting. A few things that really stuck out to me about this episode. One was the fact that politicians are often afraid of promoting or passing legislation that would require these megachurches from filing a 990 and revealing where the money is going. Whenever there is an attempt to hold these megachurches and televangelists accountable and seek transparency, they claim religious persecution. But that isn't what these policies are about at all. None of this would prevent churches from sharing the gospel or doing what they normally do. It would simply make them accountable to the people who are giving them money, the tithers, essentially. I think that we need to be very clear that none of this is an attempt to hurt the church. Instead, it is about making what the churches are doing more visible and less secretive. Another thing I found really interesting is that James River now operates essentially as a nonprofit corporation. They do not have any members, and therefore they do not have to disclose anything. Everything can be done in secret behind closed doors, and the tithers at James River are not entitled to know anything that's going on. James River doesn't have to reveal how much the pastors make, how much they're spending, none of that stuff. The church is ran by a board of directors that is appointed by John Lindell, and he can fire them and hire new members without any accountability. He literally answers to no one. We've joked in the past that James River is the Lindell Empire, and essentially that is true. They have the same organization structure as Joel Osteen does, which I find very interesting and should also be very concerning, honestly. And I also found it fascinating that some of these pastors out there are getting housing allowances over $200,000 a year. This is tax exempt in most cases. Sometimes the church even owns the property and the pastor doesn't have to pay anything, even though the house may be worth millions of dollars. And we know that John Lindell lives in a house between around 3 million and 5 million, somewhere in that range. James River took a PPP loan during COVID for over $2 million, and it was forgiven. So the taxpayers essentially gave the church a couple $1 million for free. Well, they are certainly not the only organization out there to do that. It should be noted that most regular businesses who took the PPP loans had to disclose certain details about the company to the public, to the government, to get those funds and afterwards. So yes, a lot of them were forgiven. James River is hardly the only one that got forgiven. But because James River is a nonprofit religious organization, they didn't have to disclose as much information as other people did. So we don't really know all the details, and they don't really have to tell us the details. Again, this should be kind of concerning to most of us. What did you find most interesting about this episode? You can share your thoughts with us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/badfruitpodcast, or you can email us at badfruitpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to learn more about the Trinity Foundation or get in touch with them, you can find them at their website, which is trinityfi.org. That is Trinity, F as in Frank, I as in iguana.org. Or you can email them at trinity@trinityfi.org. I'll include links in the show notes and on our Facebook page, so if you really want to get in touch with them, you'll be able to do that. Thank you so much for listening to the Bad Fruit Podcast, and until next time, have a great day.